Hey guys, tonight we're easing into a story that isn't heroic or shiny, but very human, very quiet, and very real. Before we settle in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I love picturing this as one shared late-night room across the world. And if you genuinely enjoy these slow, honest journeys into the past, feel free to like the video and subscribe. No pressure. We're just hanging out in history together. You're standing somewhere familiar when it happens. A street you know, a shoreline, a path between fields. One moment you're thinking about food, chores, maybe sleep, and the next moment the world tilts. Hands close around your arm. Voices speak too fast, or in words you don't understand. This is the part history often rushes through, but for you, this moment stretches. This is where boyhood snaps. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You are young, maybe 12, maybe 14, maybe younger, and the first lesson comes fast. Age doesn't protect you. Across many ancient societies, enslaved young males were taken precisely because they were adaptable. Roman records casually note, boys captured in wars and sold in markets. That's the mainstream fact, the one textbooks admit. What they don't linger on is the shock of it, the way your feet leave the ground, the way familiar sounds vanish behind you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk when you're told. You stop when you're shoved. You learn very quickly that crying doesn't help, and shouting makes things worse. Someone ties a cord around your wrist, not tightly, just enough to remind you that escape is a fantasy for later, not now. Historians still argue whether most boys were taken during formal raids or opportunistic snatching during chaos, but either way, the result feels the same from inside your chest. Everything you were before is suddenly very far away. You're moved with others sometimes, a small cluster of boys, all pretending not to be scared, all stealing quick looks at one another's faces. This is your first social rule of captivity. Don't stand out. In some regions, like ancient Greece or Mesopotamia, traders preferred younger males because they could be trained longer and sold for higher lifetime value. That's a cold sentence, but you feel its truth when someone tilts your chin up, checks your teeth, presses a thumb into your shoulder muscle like they're inspecting fruit. Here's a strange, almost unbelievable tidbit. In certain ancient markets, boys were rubbed with oil or ash to make them look healthier under harsh sunlight. It's not grooming for comfort, it's marketing. You don't know that word yet, but you understand the feeling of being prepared for someone else's decision. Night comes and you sleep in a place that smells wrong. Too many bodies, old wood, fear soaked into the air. Sleep doesn't come easily. Your thoughts loop back to home in fragments. A voice, a doorway. Food you didn't realize you'd miss this much. You tell yourself you'll remember everything, every detail, but already the edges are blurring. That scares you more than the chains. The next day, you're moved again. Walking becomes your whole world. Step, dust. Step, rope tug. This is when you notice something subtle. Adults look through you, not past you, through you. You're no longer a child to be protected, but not yet a man worth listening to. You exist in a narrow, uncomfortable in-between, and ancient systems were very good at exploiting that space. A light joke slips in, because your mind needs it. You think, briefly, that if there were a loyalty card for forced marches, you'd earn free sandals by now. Humour becomes a tiny shield, even here, especially here. You learn new sounds, commands. The tone matters more than the words. Sharp means danger. Flat means routine. Calm is rare and suspicious. In some civilizations, boys were deliberately kept disoriented for the first few weeks, moved often, spoken to unpredictably, because confusion reduced resistance. Historians still debate how systematic this was, but you feel the strategy working on you in real time. At some point, someone asks your name. You answer without thinking, relief flooding you. Finally, a normal question. The relief dies when they repeat it wrong, or laugh, or shake their head and assign you another sound instead. This doesn't hurt like a beating would. It hurts slower. Your name, the thing you carried since birth, is suddenly optional. You start measuring time differently. Not by days, but by meals, by stops, by how tired your legs feel. Hunger becomes a steady background noise, like that fan humming beside your bed right now. You don't starve yet, that comes later, but you're never full. Just managed. Just functional. You notice something else. The older enslaved boys don't talk much. When they do, it's practical. Where to step, when to lower your eyes. One of them shows you how to breathe slowly when panic rises. That's a gift. He doesn't frame it that way, but it is. There's uncertainty even now, in this early stage. Scholars still argue whether enslaved boys understood their fate immediately or clung to hope longer than adults. You feel both at once. Hope flickers. Someone will recognize you, rescue you, trade you back. But another part of you is already adjusting, already shrinking the future into something survivable. By the time you reach your destination, market, household, camp, you're quieter. Not because you've been ordered to be, but because silence feels safer. You've learned the first rule of enslaved life without anyone spelling it out. Attention is dangerous. As you stand there, waiting for the next instruction, you realize something unsettling. You are still you. You still think, remember, feel. But the world no longer sees those things as relevant. That understanding settles in your bones. This is where the long night begins. And as you wait, breathing slow, trying to stay invisible, you sense that this moment, the capture, the walk, the first nights away, is going to echo through everything that comes next. You don't realize how much a name weighs until someone takes it from you. At first, you think the mispronunciation is an accident. You correct it softly, once, maybe twice. The response is a shrug, a frown, or a laugh that tells you this isn't a conversation. It's a decision already made. A new sound replaces the old one. Shorter, easier, owned. You hear it called across a yard or corridor, and it takes a heartbeat to recognize it's meant for you. That hesitation earns you a sharp look. You learn quickly, you answer faster next time. This is how it begins, not with chains, but with language. Across many ancient societies, enslaved people were routinely renamed to mark ownership. Roman households often gave enslaved boys names based on appearance or function. That's the mainstream fact historians agree on. For you, it feels like being edited. The old name doesn't vanish immediately. It lingers in your head, especially at night, when the smells of dust and oil settle and your body finally stops moving. You repeat it silently, like a charm. You're not being dramatic, you're being practical. You sense that if you lose that sound completely, something important goes with it. There's a strange logic to the renaming. Short names are easier to shout, easier to remember, easier to replace. You notice how many boys around you share similar names, variations of the same few syllables. It's efficient, dehumanizing, yes, but very organized. Ancient systems loved efficiency. Here's a quirky detail scholars like to mention. In some Greek and Roman settings, enslaved boys were named after mythological figures, but always minor ones. Messengers, servants, side characters, never heroes. It's a subtle psychological trick. You're reminded daily of where you sit in the story. You begin to understand that responding to your new name isn't optional. It's tied to food, rest, and safety. Ignore it, and consequences follow. Not always violence, sometimes just being skipped, overlooked, forgotten at mealtime. Hunger is persuasive, you answer. Another light joke slips through your tired mind. Congratulations, you think. You've unlocked a new username you didn't choose and can't change. Humor again, quiet, internal, keeps something flexible inside you. As days pass, the old name becomes heavier to carry. You don't dare speak it aloud. You notice something unsettling. When you think of yourself doing tasks, walking, carrying, waiting, you sometimes use the new name in your head. That realization scares you more than the ropes did. Historians still argue whether renaming caused faster psychological compliance or simply reflected control already achieved. From inside your thoughts, it feels like both. You watch adults use names as tools. Praise sounds different than commands, even when it's the same word. Sometimes your name is drawn out kindly, almost warmly. That's dangerous. You want to lean into it, but you remember the rule you learned during capture. Attention is dangerous. You keep your eyes down. In some cultures, enslaved boys were renamed multiple times. Once upon capture, again upon sale, again when reassigned. Each change trims a little more of the past away. You start to think of memory like a rope that's fraying strand by strand, still holding, for now. There's a mainstream historical certainty here too. Written records almost never preserve enslaved boys' birth names. Contracts list prices, ages, skills, never who you were before. That absence isn't accidental. It's structural forgetting. One older boy whispers his real name to you once late at night. It's a gift and a burden. You hold it carefully. You never repeat it. Some things survive only if kept quiet. By the end of this stage, you answer without hesitation. Your body reacts before your mind. You've learned the sound that means you, or at least the version of you the world wants. And somewhere deep inside, you tuck the old name away, unsure whether it's something you'll one day reclaim, or something you're meant to outgrow. Training doesn't start with cruelty. That's the unsettling part. It starts with routine. You wake when others wake. You move when others move. No one explains why. Explanations are a luxury. But your body learns the pattern faster than your mind ever could. This is how you're trained. Not as a student, but as a tool that needs calibrating. Your first lessons are physical. How to stand. How to carry weight without spilling it. How to keep your eyes low but your ears open. You're corrected constantly. Sometimes with words, sometimes with a tap of a stick or the snap of fingers. It's not always punishment. Often it's repetition. Again. 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 The goal isn't pain. It's predictability. Across the ancient world, enslaved boys were deliberately trained young because habits set early were harder to break later. Roman agricultural manuals even discuss training enslaved youths for specific labor roles, a mainstream historical fact that survives in surprisingly casual language. You're not told this, of course. You just feel the long days shaping you. Mornings blur into work, afternoons blur into more work. You learn to move efficiently because inefficiency draws attention. Remember that rule. You keep remembering it. Efficiency becomes a kind of invisibility cloak, and you cling to it. Here's a strange, almost darkly funny detail. In some ancient households, enslaved boys were trained using call and response chants to keep rhythm during labor. It helped productivity, they said. You don't know the words at first, but you mouth them anyway. Miss a beat, and everyone notices. Hit the rhythm, and for a moment, you disappear into the sound. It's like being part of a machine that hums just well enough not to break. You're trained not just in tasks, but in emotions. Don't flinch. Don't rush unless told. Don't linger unless invited. You notice how adults watch your face more than your hands. A smile at the wrong moment can earn suspicion. A blank look is safer. So you practice neutral. You get very good at neutral. A light joke floats through your head as you scrub or carry or walk. Congratulations, you think. You've unlocked a new skill tree. Obedience, endurance, and advanced silence. No tutorial, no exit menu. Punishment exists, but it's often theatrical. Someone else is corrected loudly so the rest of you learn quietly. You understand the lesson immediately. Historians still argue whether ancient systems relied more on fear or routine to maintain control, but from where you stand, it's clearly the combination that works. Fear sharpens attention, routine dulls resistance. Food becomes part of training too. Meals arrive at set times in set amounts, enough to function, rarely enough to feel full. You learn how to eat quickly without appearing desperate. You learn how to hide small pieces for later. That's not rebellion, it's survival. Someone older shows you how to soften stale bread with water. Another gift. Quiet, practical. Your body changes faster than you expect. Muscles ache, then harden. Blisters turn into calluses. You stop noticing small pains because noticing them doesn't help. This is when you realize something unsettling. The work doesn't just exhaust you, it defines you. When someone gestures toward a task, you already know which one is yours. You've been sorted. There's uncertainty here too. Scholars still debate how standardized training was across regions. whether boys were formally taught roles or simply thrown into labour until they adapted. Your experience feels like both. No classroom, no lessons, but endless correction until the wrong movements disappear. Sometimes someone offers praise. It's rare and confusing. A nod, a word. Your chest tightens with something dangerously close to pride. You squash it immediately. You've learned that emotional spikes, high or low, draw notice. Flat is safe. Flat keeps you fed. You notice older enslaved men watching you sometimes, assessing, not cruelly, almost sadly. They know what comes next. You don't ask. Questions are another thing you're trained out of. There's a fringe tidbit whispered among scholars. In some cultures, enslaved boys were deliberately trained in slightly inefficient methods, so they wouldn't outshine free labourers. Whether that was intentional or incidental is debated, but you do notice how excellence isn't rewarded here. Adequacy is. Adequacy keeps you alive. Your nights are shorter now. Sleep comes fast, heavy, dreamless. When you do dream, it's often of movement. Walking, carrying, repeating. Your old life appears less and less. When it does, it feels like someone else's memory. That scares you, but you don't dwell on it. Dwelling wastes energy. Another small joke surfaces as you drift off one night. If there were an award for most improved obedience, you'd win it by accident. You snort quietly and immediately regret it. Sound travels at night. You roll over and go still. By the end of this phase, your body responds before your thoughts. Hands move when called. Feet turn automatically. You've been trained, yes, but not broken. Not yet. There's still a part of you watching, noting, remembering. You don't know what it's for, but you protect it carefully. Because you sense, even now, that the training isn't finished. It's only laid the foundation, and what gets built on top of it will demand even more from you. The work doesn't ask whether you're ready. It simply arrives, every morning, like the sun, unimpressed by your age, your size, or the way your shoulders still ache from yesterday. You wake up already tired. That becomes your baseline. If you ever feel rested again, it surprises you. You're given tasks meant for grown bodies, carrying water, hauling bundles, grinding grain, digging, scrubbing, lifting, holding things in place for longer than feels reasonable. Your arms shake sometimes, especially early on. You learn quickly not to let that show. Shaking attracts correction. Dropping something attracts worse. Across many ancient societies, enslaved boys were intentionally worked alongside adults to accelerate physical development. Roman estate records mention boys assigned to field labour well before what we'd now consider adulthood. That's the mainstream fact. The unspoken part is how your bones and joints complain quietly as they adapt faster than they should. Time stretches strangely during work. Hours don't move like they used to. They thicken. You stop counting. Instead, you measure progress by sensations. When your hands go numb, when sweat dries into salt on your skin, when the sun shifts just enough to signal that part of the day is over. These cues replace clocks. There's a rhythm to adult labour that you have to learn quickly. Too slow, and you're a burden. Too fast, and you're noticed. Remember that rule again. Attention is dangerous. You aim for the middle. Always the middle. Adequate. Invisible. Here's a small, odd detail historians have noticed. In some ancient workshops, enslaved boys were given tools slightly oversized for their hands. Whether intentional or just a lack of concern is debated, but you feel it every time your grip slips. You compensate by gripping harder. That builds strength, but also pain. You don't complain. Complaints don't change tool sizes. You notice how adults pace themselves. Short pauses. Controlled breaths. They don't rush to finish because finishing early doesn't mean rest. It just means more work. You copy them. This is another lesson that isn't taught, only absorbed. A light joke slips through your exhaustion. Congratulations, you think. You're now employed full-time with no pay, no benefits, and a dress code you didn't choose. The humour is dry, almost academic. It keeps your mind from collapsing inward. Food becomes fuel, nothing more. You eat to keep moving. Some days, the work burns more than the food replaces. Those are the days you feel hollowed out, like a pot scraped too clean. You learn to drink water slowly, letting it sit in your mouth for a second before swallowing. It tricks your body into thinking there's more. There's a constant awareness of watching eyes, overseers, masters, sometimes just other workers gauging whether you're pulling your weight. Pressure comes from all directions. Historians still argue how much peer enforcement existed among enslaved groups, but you feel it, the unspoken expectation to keep up so no one is punished because of you. Your body changes again. Faster now, you grow lean, compact, efficient. Strength settles into you in ways that surprise you. You lift things now that once felt impossible. That realization brings a flicker of pride, and then a flicker of fear. Strength makes you useful. Usefulness keeps you here. In some places, enslaved boys were rotated through different tasks to see where they fit best. Field today, workshop tomorrow, kitchen the next. It sounds varied on paper. In reality, it means your muscles never fully recover. Each task hurts in a new way. You stop expecting comfort. You start expecting endurance. You notice older men occasionally intervening, subtly taking the heavier end of a load, shifting positions so you don't strain too hard. They never explain why. Maybe they see themselves in you. Maybe they remember when their own strength was still forming. These moments are brief, almost invisible, but they matter more than you'd admit. There's uncertainty here too. Scholars still debate whether ancient societies understood the long-term physical damage of overworking young bodies. You suspect they did, at least on some level. You're living proof that the system accepted the cost. By night, your hands throb. You flex your fingers slowly, feeling each joint answer back. Sleep comes fast, but not gently. Dreams are shallow. When you wake, the ache is already there, waiting. It greets you like an old acquaintance. You realize something quietly profound during this phase. Work has replaced childhood milestones. Instead of games, you measure yourself by how much you can carry. Instead of growth marks on a wall, you track how long you can labor without stopping. Growing up isn't a celebration here, it's an expectation. As you lie down, muscles humming, you understand that this workload isn't temporary. It's not training anymore. This is your life now. Long days, adult tasks, and a body forced to mature on someone else's schedule. And as sleep pulls you under, you sense that the work is doing more than shaping your muscles. It's reshaping how you think about effort, worth, and survival. Lessons that will follow you long after today's labor ends. Hunger becomes the quiet companion that never leaves you. Not the sharp, dramatic kind you imagined before all this, the kind that makes your stomach scream, but a steady, dull presence that hums beneath everything else. You wake with it, you work with it, you fall asleep already planning how to manage it tomorrow. Meals are predictable in timing, not in generosity. A ladle of grain, a chunk of bread, sometimes a thin stew that smells richer than it tastes. Across many ancient societies, enslaved laborers were fed just enough to remain functional, and enslaved boys were no exception. Roman agricultural writers openly recommended rations calibrated to labor output. That's the mainstream fact. From your side of the bowl, it translates to never quite feeling finished. You learn to eat fast, but not too fast. Speed looks desperate. Desperation attracts attention. You chew thoroughly anyway, not for digestion, but because chewing makes the meal last longer in your mouth. Texture becomes important. Warmth matters. You memorize which foods give you energy and which just fill space. Here's a strange historical tidbit. In some ancient kitchens, enslaved boys assigned to food prep were expected to taste dishes for quality, and sometimes safety. Officially, it was about standards. Unofficially, it was about expendability. You're not in the kitchen yet, but you hear whispers about it. Food is never just food here. It's hierarchy in edible form. On days when rations run thin, you notice how creativity blooms quietly. Someone saves crumbs. Someone soaks hard bread in water. Someone trades a favor for an extra scoop. No one calls this stealing. It's survival math. You learn it quickly. You also learn the unspoken rules of eating spaces. Where you're allowed to sit. How much noise is tolerated. When you're expected to stop, even if there's food left. Sometimes the meal ends not because you're done, but because someone important has finished. That's your cue. A small joke drifts through your mind one evening as you stare into a bowl that looks disappointingly familiar. You think about how every ancient civilization apparently agreed on one thing: no seasoning for the enslaved. It's not funny, but it's enough to keep your thoughts from sinking too deep. Your body adapts again. Hunger sharpens your senses. You smell food from farther away. You notice scraps others miss. This isn't a superpower, it's a warning sign. But you take what you can get. You start to understand your own limits. How long you can work without eating. How much water offsets an empty stomach. How to slow yourself down when dizziness creeps in. Historians still argue whether enslaved boys experienced chronic malnutrition or cyclical hunger depending on region and era. You suspect the answer is yes. Some days you feel almost normal. Other days your hands shake for reasons that have nothing to do with fear. There's a strange social aspect to hunger too. Shared deprivation builds fragile bonds. You exchange looks over empty bowls. You silently note who eats last, who eats least. These observations matter. They teach you where you stand. Occasionally, food becomes a reward. Extra bread for good work. A fuller bowl after a long day. This is dangerous. Your brain lights up in response, connecting obedience to nourishment. You feel it happening and hate how effective it is. But hunger is persuasive. Hunger rewires priorities. In some cultures, enslaved boys were allowed small garden plots or scraps from harvest leftovers. Whether this was kindness or cost-saving is debated. You don't have a plot. You have hope, thin and conditional. Sometimes an older worker slips you something small, a root, a bite. These moments feel enormous. At night, hunger softens into a background ache. You curl slightly, conserving energy. Your thoughts slow. Food dreams visit you. Meals exaggerated, impossible, warm. You wake from them more tired than before. And yet, you survive. Day after day. You learn that survival isn't about satisfaction. It's about balance. Enough food to move. Enough restraint to stay unnoticed. Enough hope to keep going. As you drift towards sleep, stomach empty but steady, you realize hunger has taught you a new language, the language of limits. And once learned, it's very hard to forget. Fear becomes part of the air you breathe. Not always sharp, not always loud. Often it's just there. Like dust you stop noticing until it coats everything. You wake with it already settled in your chest, a low pressure reminding you to stay alert. Violence doesn't have to happen constantly to work. It only has to be possible. Discipline is unpredictable by design. Sometimes a mistake earns nothing more than a glare. Other times, the same mistake brings swift correction. You never quite know which version of the world you're in today. That uncertainty trains you better than consistency ever could. You move carefully. You speak less. You watch everything. Across many ancient societies, corporal punishment was considered a normal management tool for enslaved people, including youths. Roman legal texts openly discuss physical discipline as a right of ownership. That's the mainstream historical fact. What those texts don't capture is how your body learns to anticipate it, the way your shoulders tense before a voice even rises. You learn to read moods with frightening accuracy, footsteps, breathing patterns, the way someone sets an object down. These tiny cues become your early warning system. You adjust instantly, step back, look down, go still. Survival sharpens perception in ways no school ever could. Here's a strange, unsettling tidbit. In some ancient households, punishment was deliberately staged in public spaces, not to correct the individual, but to educate everyone else. The message wasn't, "You did wrong," it was, "This can happen." You understand that lesson without needing translation. Fear is communal. A light joke flickers through your mind during a tense moment. Something like, "Wow, you've developed a sixth sense for incoming trouble." You immediately feel guilty for thinking it. Humor feels risky here, even inside your own head. Still, it's one of the few things that hasn't been taken yet. Violence isn't always physical. Sometimes it's withholding. Food delayed, rest shortened, work extended just enough to hurt. These softer punishments are harder to explain and easier to deny. Historians still argue how often such measures were used compared to overt brutality. From where you stand, they blend together into the same outcome: control. You notice how fear travels downward. Those with power release it, those without absorb it. Older enslaved men sometimes snap at you for small things, not because you deserve it, but because pressure needs an outlet. You don't take it personally. You can't afford to. Understanding this doesn't make it pleasant, but it makes it survivable. There's a rule you learn without anyone teaching it. Never be the last to notice a problem. Spilled water, dropped tool, raised voice. Being first to react can save you. Being last makes you visible. You train yourself to respond before being addressed, to fix issues before they are acknowledged. This earns fewer punishments than excellence ever would. In some places, enslaved boys were used as messengers or attendants, precisely because fear made them attentive. Whether this was intentional conditioning or practical selection is debated. You just know your heart rate barely spikes anymore when someone calls sharply. It's already elevated, always. Your body stores fear in strange ways. Jaw clenched, breath shallow, muscles tight even at rest. At night, you sometimes wake suddenly, convinced you heard something. Other boys do too. No one mentions it in daylight. Daytime is for functioning. There's uncertainty here as well. Scholars still debate how much violence was daily versus episodic, exaggerated in later accounts or minimized in records. Your experience doesn't care about the debate. Even rare violence casts a long shadow. Even the possibility changes how you live. You notice something else, quieter but important. Fear teaches cooperation. You and the others learn to protect each other indirectly. Warning glances, subtle gestures, shared silence. These aren't heroic acts. They're practical ones. They reduce risk. As time passes, you stop thinking of fear as an event. It's a condition, like hunger, like work. You adjust your expectations around it. You plan your movements with it in mind. You measure days by how smoothly they pass, not by how happy you feel. When you finally lie down at night, heart still humming, you focus on slowing your breathing. In, out. You imagine the sound of something steady and harmless. Wind, water, that fan humming beside your bed right now. It helps a little, and as sleep edges closer, you understand something important. Fear hasn't destroyed you. It has shaped you, sharpened you, quieted you. Whether that counts as survival or loss is something historians still argue about. You just know that tomorrow, when you wake, fear will be there again, waiting patiently, like everything else in this life. You are rarely alone, yet loneliness settles into you like a second skin. Bodies surround you, working beside you, sleeping near you, breathing in the same heavy air. But real connection is scarce and fragile. Words are limited. Trust is risky. Silence becomes the safest common language. In crowded spaces, you learn how to make yourself small. Not physically, there's no room for that, but emotionally. You don't ask questions. You don't share stories. Personal details are currency you can't afford to spend. Across many ancient societies, enslaved people were deliberately housed and worked in groups to discourage individual identity while maximizing labor. That's the mainstream fact. From inside the crowd, it feels like being invisible and exposed at the same time. You notice how conversation changes depending on who's nearby. When authority is close, talk dries up instantly. When it's not, whispers emerge. Short, practical exchanges. Where to stand, who to avoid, which days are worse. This is how knowledge travels here, quietly, sideways, never officially. Here's a small, poignant detail historians have uncovered. In some ancient quarters, enslaved boys formed temporary age clusters, loosely sticking near those close to their own years. Not families, not friendships, more like mutual recognition. You gravitate toward a few familiar faces without ever naming the bond. It's safer that way. At night, the loneliness sharpens. You lie awake, listening to breathing, coughing, shifting bodies. Sound replaces conversation. You learn who snores, who cries quietly, who wakes from nightmares. No one comments. Acknowledging vulnerability feels dangerous. Still, you start to feel connected through rhythm alone. Shared wake times, shared exhaustion, shared silence. A soft joke drifts through your mind one evening. Congratulations, you think. You've joined the world's quietest social club. Membership mandatory. Benefits unclear. It almost makes you smile. Almost. You form bonds without planning to. A shared glance when someone stumbles. A hand steadying a load. Someone passing you a tool without being asked. These micro moments add up. They're not friendship, as you once knew it. They're proximity trust. Temporary, conditional, deeply human. Historians still argue how much solidarity existed among enslaved youths versus how often systems forced competition. You feel both. Sometimes you're encouraged to outperform others. Sometimes everyone suffers together. The uncertainty keeps bonds thin but real. There's an older boy who rarely speaks. He's always near, though. He doesn't look at you directly, but you notice he adjusts his pace to match yours. When you slow, he slows. When you recover, he does too. This wordless alignment becomes comforting. You never discuss it. You don't need to. Loneliness isn't just about others. It's also about losing your inner audience. There's no one to perform for anymore. No one who knows your jokes, your habits, your old self. You stop narrating your life in your head. You start just doing it. That quiet shift feels like another small loss. In some regions, enslaved boys were separated deliberately after forming visible bonds to prevent loyalty that could challenge control. Whether this was systematic or situational is debated. You sense the risk anyway. When you feel too close to someone, you instinctively pull back. Attachment becomes another thing to ration. And yet, something persists. You share food when you can. You exchange warnings. You remember small details about others. Injuries, fears, strengths. These memories anchor you in a social world, however limited. They remind you that you're not the only one enduring this. As days pass, loneliness becomes quieter, less sharp. Not because it's gone, but because you've made room for it. It sits beside hunger and fear, another constant to manage. You don't fight it anymore, you coexist. When night finally settles, you close your eyes and listen to the collective breathing around you. It's oddly soothing. Proof of life, proof of continuation. You let that sound carry you towards sleep. And as you drift, you realize that even in enforced crowds, the human instinct to connect never fully disappears. It just learns to speak in whispers. Your body changes whether you're ready or not. There's no ceremony for it, no quiet guidance, no reassuring voice explaining what's happening. One day you notice your limbs feel heavier, stronger, slightly unfamiliar. Another day your voice cracks at the worst possible moment, and you feel heat rush to your face as if you've done something wrong. Puberty arrives here without permission, and inside captivity, it's less a milestone and more a complication. You grow taller, or broader, or sharper at the edges, and with each change, expectations shift. Tasks that once felt heavy are now assumed to be easy. You're given more responsibility without being asked if you can carry it. Across many ancient societies, enslaved boys were reclassified as adult labourers as soon as their bodies showed signs of maturity. Roman records often blurred the line between boy and man entirely. That's the mainstream fact. Childhood here ends not by age, but by appearance. You become aware of how you're seen, noticed differently, watched longer. Authority lingers near you in ways it didn't before. Sometimes that attention is about work, more trust, more weight, longer hours. Sometimes it's harder to name. You learn quickly that physical maturity brings new risks, as well as new demands. Here's a strange and unsettling historical tidbit. In some ancient systems, enslaved youths were deliberately kept underfed to delay physical development, preserving their classification as boys for longer. Whether this was intentional policy or economic coincidence is debated, but you feel the tension between hunger and growth playing out inside your own body. You don't talk about these changes with anyone. There's no language for it here, at least none that feels safe. Questions would mark you as vulnerable or ignorant, and both are dangerous. So you observe. You learn by watching older men, noting how they carry themselves, how they avoid trouble, how they endure. A small dry joke surfaces as you realize you're expected to act like an adult without ever being treated like one. You think, wow, instant promotion, Same job, more work, still no benefits. The humour is thin, but it helps you breathe. Your emotions change too. Anger flashes hotter now, sharper. You feel it when orders are unfair, when blame lands on you without reason. You learn to swallow it immediately. Anger here doesn't lead to justice, it leads to consequences. Historians still argue whether enslaved adolescents were considered more rebellious than younger boys. From inside your chest, the impulse feels natural. The restraint is learned. Sleep shifts. Dreams grow more vivid, sometimes confusing. You wake with feelings you don't know where to put. Restlessness, frustration, longing for something undefined. There's no outlet for this energy except work, so work absorbs it. You push harder. You endure longer. You become efficient in new ways. You notice how older enslaved men treat you now. Less protective, more expectant. The subtle buffering they once provided fades. Not out of cruelty, but realism. They know the system won't excuse you anymore. You've crossed an invisible line. There's uncertainty wrapped around this stage too. Scholars still debate how ancient societies conceptualized adolescence at all, especially among enslaved populations. Did they see you as a child, a man, or simply labor? The answer seems to change depending on who's asking and what they need from you. One night, you catch your reflection in dark water or polished metal. For a moment, you don't recognize yourself. The face looking back is harder, more guarded, older. You search it for traces of who you were. Some are still there, some aren't. Growing up here doesn't come with guidance, it comes with pressure. Expectations pile on quietly, relentlessly. You're supposed to know more now. Endure more, need less. You adjust because adjustment is what you've been practicing all along. As you lie down, body buzzing with unfamiliar energy, you realize that maturity in captivity isn't about gaining freedom or voice. It's about becoming useful in more demanding ways. And that realization settles in, heavy and inescapable, as sleep finally pulls you under. Resistance doesn't look the way stories promise. There are no speeches, no dramatic turning points, no sudden reversals of fortune. What you have instead are small choices, quiet adjustments, moments so subtle they could pass for nothing at all. But they matter. They matter because they're yours. You learn early that open defiance is a losing game. The system is built to crush that quickly. So resistance slips sideways. You work well, but not too well. You follow orders, but interpret them narrowly. You conserve energy where you can, spend it only when necessary. This is the first kind of resistance. Survival with intent. Across many ancient societies, enslaved people resisted primarily through subtle means. Work slowdowns, feigned ignorance, quiet sabotage that left no clear culprit. Roman writers complain endlessly about lazy or unreliable enslaved labourers without ever quite understanding why. That's the mainstream historical fact. From your side of the equation, it's strategy. You learn how to look busy without being efficient, how to stretch a task just enough to protect yourself without inviting scrutiny. It's a delicate balance. Too slow and you're punished. Too fast and expectations rise. You live in the narrow space between. Here's a strange, almost clever historical tidbit. In some ancient workshops, enslaved boys deliberately developed slightly different techniques from one another, so mistakes couldn't be traced back to a single person. Historians still debate whether this was coordinated or instinctive, but you feel the logic immediately. Shared risk is safer than individual blame. Sometimes resistance is mental. You keep memories alive on purpose. Songs, rhythms, phrases from before, replayed silently while your hands work. No one can hear them. No one can take them unless you let them fade. This kind of resistance leaves no marks, but it preserves something essential. A light joke flickers through your mind as you repeat a task you've done 1,000 times. Congratulations, you think. You've mastered the art of doing exactly enough. It almost feels like a skill worth listing somewhere. Almost. You notice others resisting too, though you never name it aloud. A dropped tool here, a misunderstood order there. Someone forgetting just enough to force a pause. These acts are rarely discussed. Acknowledging them would make them dangerous. Silence protects everyone involved. Historians still argue whether enslaved youths were more likely to resist quietly than adults, given their adaptability and lack of status. From where you stand, quiet resistance is simply the only form that fits inside a growing body with no authority. Sometimes resistance looks like care. You warn someone before trouble arrives. You take a heavier share one day so someone else can recover. You share food when you shouldn't. These acts don't challenge the system directly, but they weaken its grip at the edges. They remind you, and others, that you're still human. There's also the resistance of imagination. You picture different futures, even if they feel unrealistic. You imagine yourself older, elsewhere, unnamed by this place. You don't cling to these visions too tightly. That would hurt, but you let them exist. Historians can't measure this kind of resistance, but it's there. Not every attempt works. Sometimes you misjudge. Sometimes you're caught. The consequences reinforce caution. You adapt again. Resistance here is iterative. You learn what holds and what snaps. As night comes, you replay the day not to regret it, but to refine it. What worked, what didn't, where you can bend next time. This quiet analysis becomes part of your routine, as familiar as hunger and work. And as sleep settles in, you understand something important. Resistance doesn't always aim to win. Sometimes it aims simply to endure without disappearing completely. In that narrow goal, you are succeeding, one small, stubborn choice at a time. Belief slips in quietly, almost unnoticed among the routines and labour. You don't have much choice, but you discover that prayers, charms, and whispered superstitions carry weight that the overseers can't touch. They occupy a private space inside your chest, a kind of invisible shield against the endless work and ever-present fear. Across many ancient cultures, enslaved boys were encouraged or allowed to carry amulets or offer prayers to minor gods or household spirits. Roman texts even mention small rituals performed to ensure the safety of young labourers, though they are framed as convenience for the masters rather than compassion. That's the mainstream historical fact. You feel it differently. Magic is survival. You notice patterns early, saying a certain phrase before stepping into a particularly dangerous task, tapping a token 3 times before a long march, offering a hidden piece of food to a small figurine before eating yourself. It doesn't always make sense, but it sometimes works, or so it feels. And that feeling is enough to keep you going. Here's a quirky detail historians note. In some ancient households, enslaved youths would carry tiny dolls or figures representing protective spirits and hide them in sleeves or pockets. Whether these were sanctioned or illicit is debated. You, of course, tuck your own little charm wherever you can hide it, a private talisman no one will ever acknowledge. You also notice that belief isn't uniform. Some boys adopt it enthusiastically, others perform it only to avoid mockery or punishment. You occupy a space in between, half instinct, half calculation. Still, even this ambiguous devotion shapes behaviour, giving a flicker of control in a life where control is scarce. Prayer becomes a rhythm alongside work, a silent exhale with each repetitive motion, a small ritual before each meal, a whispered hope during marches. Sometimes it's for safety, sometimes for strength, sometimes just to remind yourself that your mind is still your own. Scholars still argue whether superstition or deliberate ritual provided more psychological benefit. From inside your chest, it feels inseparable. A soft joke surfaces when you tuck a token under your shirt. Congratulations, you think. You now have a tiny invisible friend who may or may not be listening, but it's slightly better than nothing. Humour, even faint, becomes a companion here too. Belief also fosters subtle community. Boys trade charms, share whispered spells, or nod knowingly when one's luck seems to hold. Bonds form not just through survival, but through shared faith, however tentative. It's solidarity cloaked in secrecy. You notice how belief changes perception of danger. A sharp order, a raised hand, even a bruise feels less crushing when you think an unseen force is watching, guiding, or protecting you. Not reliable, not guaranteed, but comforting enough to give pause. At night, before sleep, you often repeat these small rituals. A finger trace on a charm, a quiet word. It slows your pulse, softens your chest, reminds you that some part of your will is still yours. Even as physical exhaustion presses down, belief gives a subtle sense of agency. It is fragile, ephemeral, yet astonishingly persistent. The work, the hunger, the fear, they remain, but within the quiet rituals, you carve out a mental space that no one can touch. And as the night deepens, you feel that your small acts of faith, no matter how quiet, are part of what keeps you breathing, moving, surviving. They are a gentle reminder that even in captivity, the human spirit invents ways to endure. Paths to freedom appear rarely, like glimpses of sunlight through a dense forest canopy. You don't see them often, but when you do, your heart leaps and falls all at once. Some boys are freed formally, granted manumission in legal documents. Others are sold onward, passing from one household to another, a transfer that feels like both loss and relief. And some are absorbed into the daily life of a household so fully that their role shifts quietly over years, though technically they remain enslaved. You learn that freedom isn't a single event. It's a spectrum, and almost always conditional. Across many ancient societies, legal and social mechanisms for freeing enslaved boys existed, though they were exceptional rather than standard. Roman records mention young slaves sometimes earning their freedom through service or being freed by testament. That's the mainstream historical fact. What the documents don't capture are the small lived details, the hesitations, the sudden adjustments, the anxiety that comes with any shift in status. You notice that opportunity rarely arrives evenly. A master may favour one boy for reasons you'll never fully understand. A skill, a charm, an appearance, or simply luck. The rest of you watch, quietly calculating what combination of behaviour, efficiency, and invisibility might catch the same gaze, and sometimes nothing works. Merit doesn't guarantee safety. Randomness does. Scholars still debate how much merit-based freedom actually influenced outcomes versus whim or circumstance. From where you stand, chance rules more than justice. Here's a peculiar detail. In some households, boys were sometimes granted limited privileges first. A private meal, a slightly easier task, or temporary exemption from punishment as a test before full manumission. You notice this pattern sometimes, and it becomes a game of reading signals, like trying to decode the intention behind every look and word. Freedom, when it comes, is disorienting. Boys who have lived under constant direction suddenly find choices in front of them. What to eat, where to sleep, how to act. These are freedoms you might have taken for granted once, but now they feel overwhelming. You realize that adjustment is almost as difficult as survival under captivity, and sometimes the shift is too abrupt for some to handle. Some boys are transferred to new households, and you watch them go. Relief flickers across their faces, even mixed with fear. They vanish into unknown routines. For those left behind, this is a lesson. Change can be both hope and danger. You internalize that lesson silently, because speaking about it could attract attention, and attention is always risky. You notice older boys offering advice on navigating these pathways. Obey now, learn the nuances. Note who favors whom. Timing matters as much as effort. You start to understand that survival requires both patience and cunning, like playing a game with constantly changing rules. A soft, wry joke surfaces as you observe this. Congratulations, you think. Freedom is both terrifying and confusing, and apparently you're expected to figure it out without a manual. Humour keeps your mind flexible. It's another small act of resistance, a mental reprieve amid labour and fear. Even in partial freedom or temporary favour, bonds can shift. Alliances form subtly, hierarchies emerge, and you start to see patterns that might protect you if the chance ever comes. Observation is as vital as obedience. You learn to read the room, predict reactions, and measure risk. These skills are as essential as muscles or speed. Some boys seize their moment and are quietly emancipated. Others simply move from one master to another, carrying the same burdens but perhaps with new routines or slightly better treatment. Still, the longing for autonomy persists, as stubborn and persistent as hunger or fear. You watch and learn, noting that freedom, like survival, is rarely absolute. It's incremental, fragile, and dependent on both opportunity and perception. By nightfall, you lie awake considering the paths you've glimpsed. Even the smallest hints of autonomy feel monumental after years of control. You understand that survival isn't just about enduring work or punishment. It's about recognizing openings, exploiting tiny chances, and preparing for whatever comes next. And as sleep finally drifts over you, you realize that freedom, wherever it exists, is a horizon you learn to navigate mentally long before it touches your hands. Memory becomes both a sanctuary and a burden. You carry the echoes of who you were before capture, before names were stripped, before labor became your constant companion. Some days, remembering feels like holding a fragile ember in your hands, warm, reassuring, yet ready to vanish if you grip it too tightly. Other days, it's like a shadow that stretches too long, reminding you of what's been lost. You notice how memory shapes small decisions. When carrying water, you recall the rhythm of a childhood task that made you feel competent. When hauling bundles, you remember games that taught balance or coordination. These recollections are subtle, almost invisible, yet they inform every movement. Across many ancient societies, enslaved youths retained fragments of personal and cultural memory, even as owners sought to suppress it. That's the mainstream historical fact. From your perspective, memory is survival. There's a fringe observation scholars have noted. Some enslaved boys would memorize songs, stories, or rituals in secret to preserve identity across generations. Historians still debate how widespread or systematic this practice was, but you feel its logic intuitively. You tuck your own versions of these memories away, hiding them in the folds of your mind, safe from discovery. Memory also shapes hope. You imagine returning to a place that may no longer exist, or a life that may have vanished entirely. These mental journeys are sometimes painful, but they're also proof that a part of you remains untouched. Even when your body is trained for labor, your mind retains a small pocket of freedom. A quiet joke surfaces as you recall small mischiefs from before captivity. Congratulations, you think. You used to sneak extra bites of fruit, and now you have the refined skill of subtle theft under constant supervision. Humor, again, is a lifeline, a mental muscle keeping resilience intact. You notice patterns in how others remember too. Older boys recall siblings, distant homes, minor victories, and betrayals. Their shared recollections are rarely spoken aloud, but sometimes, in subtle gestures, the collective memory strengthens bonds. You sense the unspoken agreement. Remember, but don't reveal. Protect what is yours. Memory interacts with ritual and belief. A charm you carry isn't just superstition, it's a mnemonic anchor, a way to hold on to identity. Prayers and whispered chants preserve names, faces, and events that might otherwise dissolve. Memory and ritual intertwine, reinforcing each other in ways that feel almost magical. Sleep is when memory becomes both blessing and threat. Dreams pull fragments of the past into the present, sometimes vivid, sometimes distorted. You wake with faces, smells, and voices that are no longer accessible, unsure whether they are dreams or recollections. Historians still argue how accurately enslaved youths could preserve such memories over long periods, but your mind insists on keeping them alive. Through memory, small acts of resistance continue. You refuse to forget your old self entirely. Every recollection, no matter how quiet, is an assertion. You existed before this life, and you will continue to exist within it, even under duress. These mental acts feel as essential as any physical labor. By night, memory settles like dust in your chest. Some fragments warm you, others ache. All of them remind you that survival isn't just physical, it's mental. You nurture what you can hold, store what you must protect, and let the rest drift. Memory becomes both armor and compass, guiding you through routines, fear, hunger, and work. And as sleep edges closer, you understand that even when the world strips everything from you, your mind remains a place you can never fully surrender. Time becomes a quiet rhythm that you measure in breaths, footsteps, and the subtle changes in light. Years pass, yet they blend into one another, each day echoing the last. Birthdays, holidays, milestones, they exist only in fragments you remember or imagine. Your life compresses into sequences of motion, sound, and small gestures that mark survival. It is a continuum of endurance, where each day feels like both repetition and novelty. You notice how perspective shifts over the years. Tasks that once crushed you now feel manageable, though never easy. Hunger, fatigue, and fear remain constant companions, but your body has adapted. Muscle memory takes over. Your mind, honed by vigilance, reads danger and opportunity with subtlety that borders on instinct. Across many ancient societies, enslaved boys who survived adolescence often became trusted labourers or attendants. That's the mainstream historical fact. From your viewpoint, survival is mastery of a life others decide for you. Yet mastery is fragile. The system can shift without warning. New overseers, new owners, or even minor disruptions can alter routines instantly. You've learned that flexibility is as essential as strength. Adaptation becomes a quiet art, practiced with precision over years. Historians still debate how much enslaved boys could influence their fates beyond obedience. But subtle influence, you realize, is sometimes the difference between endurance and harm. Here's a quirky tidbit. In some ancient households, older enslaved men trained younger boys not just in labor, but in social navigation, how to interpret gestures, understand moods, and avoid pitfalls. These lessons weren't formal, yet they shaped survival as much as muscle and skill. You notice yourself passing on similar knowledge to newer boys, in silent glances and subtle guidance. Friendships and bonds endure, though tenuously. Loyalty is measured in small acts, shared rations, warnings, or the rare whispered joke. Trust is never absolute. Even as you age, you remain cautious, aware that the world outside this small sphere is unpredictable and often indifferent. Belief and ritual persist too. Charms, prayers, and small secret acts continue to carve out mental space where you retain agency. Even when physical exhaustion presses down, these quiet practices provide comfort, reinforcing identity in a life designed to suppress it. Memory, finally, becomes a guide. You recall your name, your home, small fragments of joy and learning from before capture. These mental treasures anchor you. They remind you that despite the countless routines, the endless labor, and the constant observation, some part of you has never been taken. And now, as the day finally ends, as the shadows lengthen and the air cools, you feel the rhythm of your body slowing. The world softens. Tasks fade. Hunger and fear settle into background hums. You lie down, letting the day's discipline dissolve around you, holding only the quiet persistence of your mind and memory. In these final moments before sleep, you understand that survival has become a mosaic. Labor, fear, hunger, ritual, memory, tiny resistances, and quiet bonds all pieced together into the fragile pattern of your life. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm of your own heart guide you into rest, knowing that this mosaic, however delicate, is yours alone. The fire crackles softly in the corner, its amber glow stretching long shadows across the walls. You feel the warmth seep slowly into your shoulders and down your arms, a quiet comfort after days that demanded so much of your body and mind. The embers pulse like a slow heartbeat, and you imagine tracing their flicker with your eyes, letting your mind follow them as they shrink and fade. Outside, the night is still, wrapped in gentle darkness, and you can almost hear the soft hum of life continuing just beyond reach. Your thoughts drift easily, unhurried. You remember small details, faces, songs, quiet gestures that have shaped your journey. Each memory is a pebble in a long, winding river, carried gently along by the current of your mind. Some shimmer brightly, warm and familiar. Others are dull, almost hidden in the sediment of time. You let them float past without grasping too tightly, feeling only the subtle weight of their presence. The air is steady, cool against your skin, carrying the faint smell of smoke and the earth beyond. You take a slow breath and let it out slowly, feeling each exhale soften the tightness in your chest. Around you, shadows deepen and merge, and you let your imagination wander across the quiet landscape of your past and present. The work, the hunger, the fear, they all settle now, reduced to soft echoes that barely disturb the calm. As the embers glow lower, your eyelids grow heavy. You imagine the light fading into darkness, warmth diffusing into your body, until even thought itself becomes a gentle whisper. The world slows and your mind drifts freely, no longer constrained by labour, rules, or expectation. Sleep carries you quietly into dreams, gentle, unbroken, and unhurried. Good night then. Rest here. Let the warmth linger, and let yourself drift, safe for a while, until the dawn calls again.